Fictional story. All people, organizations, locations, records, and events are invented. My key stopped halfway into the deadbolt. I pulled it out, checked the teeth, and tried again. The lock on the cabin had always been a little stiff after cold weather, so at first I assumed the cylinder had jammed. Then I noticed the keypad. Someone had removed my brass deadbolt and installed a black electronic lock in its place. 4 new screw heads marked the doorframe. Beneath the keypad was a silver label, Property of Blue Heron Ridge Association. I stood there holding a key that had opened that door for 11 years. The cabin was mine. My name was on the deed. The county sent the property tax bill to me every fall. I paid the insurance, the well service, the chimney inspection, and every repair from the porch supports to the roof. Blue Heron Ridge surrounded my parcel, but my land was not part of the association. The subdivision had been built years after the cabin. My father had refused to sell the property to the developer, so they built the roads and houses around it. That history had caused small arguments before. The HOA had once questioned whether I could leave my fishing boat beside the shed. Another time, a manager claimed my guests needed association parking permits. Nothing had ever come close to this. I set my bag down and photographed the keypad, the label, the screws, and the damaged wood where my lock had been removed. Then I walked around the cabin. The windows were closed. Nothing appeared broken. Through the front glass, though, I could see objects that had not been there when I left 3 weeks earlier. A folding table stood in front of the fireplace. Glossy brochures were stacked beside a plastic display rack. 2 blue chairs faced the table. A cardboard sign leaned against the wall. Lake access registration. My furniture had been pushed aside to make room. I called the number printed on the label. A woman answered, Blue Heron Ridge Management Office. My name is Caleb Mason. I'm at the cabin on Alder Ridge Road. Someone replaced my lock. There was a short pause. This is Elaine Porter, the community manager, she said. The association secured the building after determining it was being used without authorization. I own the building. The board's records identify it as the original caretaker cottage. The county records identify it as my property. I'm not going to debate property documents by phone. I'm not asking you to debate them. I'm asking for the code. I'm not authorized to release association credentials. What authorized you to put an association lock on my door? You can submit that question in writing. I'm standing outside the building. Submit it in writing, Mr. Mason. The call ended. I considered removing the keypad myself. I had tools in the truck and could probably have done it in less than 10 minutes. Instead, I photographed everything again and called the county sheriff's non-emergency number. The deputy who arrived made it clear that he was not there to decide who owned the property. I showed him my driver's license, the county parcel page on my phone, and a digital copy of my deed. He photographed the door and looked through the window. Anything inside that creates an immediate danger? He asked. No, some tools, winterization equipment, personal papers. No animals or anyone living in there. I can document what you found, but this looks like a civil dispute. I can't order them to give you the code. I understand. He gave me an incident number and advised me not to force entry while the dispute was active. By then, it was getting dark. I sat in my truck and called Sarah Kim, the real estate attorney who had handled the cabin's refinancing 3 years earlier. I expected her voicemail, but she answered. I explained what had happened. Is the deed still in your name? She asked. Yes. Did you sign anything giving the HOA possession or management authority? No. Can you document that they are using the building? I can see their brochures and furniture through the window. Take clear photographs without entering. Then send a written objection tonight. Also tell them to preserve the electronic lock records. The lock records? If that keypad assigns separate codes, it may keep an entry history. Until then, I had been thinking only about the fact that the new lock kept me out. I had not thought about what it might record when someone else went in. I spent that night at a motel, 12 miles from the lake. From a small desk beside the window, I emailed Elaine, every board address listed on the HOA website, and the management company's general counsel. Sarah helped me draft the notice. I stated that I owned the cabin and had never authorized the HOA to enter, alter the locks, store materials, or operate any association activity inside. I demanded that they preserve all electronic access records, credential assignments, vendor work orders, invoices, emails, photographs, maintenance requests, security data, and documents identifying the cabin as association property. I also demanded restoration of access by noon the next day. Elaine answered the following morning. She did not provide the code. Her email attached a 4-page letter stating that Blue Heron Ridge believed the cabin had historically served as a caretaker facility associated with the common lake amenities. The letter said the board had inherited responsibility for the structure when control of the subdivision transferred from the developer. According to Elaine, management had acted to secure and inspect an association facility after receiving reports that an unauthorized person had been using it. The unauthorized person was me. Attached to the letter was an old development map. The clubhouse, marina, trails, and cabin were drawn in the same shade of blue. A small rectangle near the lake was labeled Caretaker Cottage. There was no parcel number beside it, no recording stamp, no deed reference, no signature. Sarah looked at the map on her laptop. "This may show what the developer once planned," she said. "It doesn't necessarily show what was transferred." We went to the county recorder's office that afternoon. The chain of title was straightforward. The cabin parcel had been separated from a larger timber tract in 1987. My father bought it in 1998. I inherited it, recorded the transfer, and later refinanced it. The subdivision plat was recorded in 2006. It showed Blue Heron Ridge wrapping around my parcel. The association's boundary stopped at my property line. A road easement gave my parcel access through the subdivision entrance. A utility easement crossed the back corner of my land. Neither document gave the HOA possession of the cabin. Neither authorized the association to replace my locks. Sarah ordered a new title report and sent a second demand letter. At 11:46 the next morning, Elaine responded that the board would not surrender the access code until its attorney reviewed the developer's turnover files. She offered to schedule a supervised visit during management office hours. My own cabin had become a place I could enter only while an HOA employee watched. Sarah spoke with the association's attorney, Robert Dean. He sounded more cautious than Elaine, but he would not direct the board to restore possession before reviewing the records. A special board meeting was scheduled for that evening. The clubhouse overlooked the marina. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs while Elaine, Robert Dean, and 3 board members took seats at a long table. The board president, Mark Hale, called the situation a property classification dispute. Elaine called it unauthorized occupancy. I placed certified copies of my deed, the recorded plat, and the tax parcel record on the table. "This is not an occupancy dispute," I said. The association replaced the lock on a privately owned building. Elaine placed the old development map beside my deed. "This structure has historically been associated with lake operations. What recorded document gives the HOA possession? We're reviewing the turnover records. What agreement lets you remove my lock? We're reviewing that as well." Sarah asked who had authorized the locksmith. Elaine said operational security decisions fell under management authority. Sarah asked for the work order. Robert Dean said the meeting was not a discovery proceeding. "No," Sarah replied. "This is the board deciding whether to keep excluding an owner after receiving his deed." Mark studied the documents. He asked whether the cabin had ever housed a caretaker. "My father sometimes paid a local man to check the dock during winter," I said. "That did not transfer ownership to the subdivision." Elaine said management had cleaned the structure, addressed safety concerns, and prepared it for seasonal lake operations. That was the first direct confirmation that the HOA had entered and begun using the cabin. Mark proposed giving me temporary supervised access while council completed its review. I refused. A supervised visit would have allowed the HOA to keep claiming control. "I'm not asking permission to visit," I said. "I'm asking you to return possession." The board went into a closed session. When they returned, Mark announced that the existing security arrangement would remain in place for 7 days, while council searched the turnover records. Sarah gathered her papers. "Then preserve the lock data," she said. "From tonight forward, the board knows there is a documented ownership dispute." The next morning, my gate transponder stopped working. The entrance arm remained down, while the reader flashed red. A guard stepped out of the booth with a clipboard. "Management suspended your credential," he said. "My deed includes a recorded road easement. I don't make those decisions." "Who entered the suspension?" He looked toward the office window. "I can issue a visitor pass for the clubhouse." "I'm not visiting the clubhouse." The guard called his supervisor, but nothing changed. I parked outside the entrance and photographed the reader, the gate, and the time on my dashboard. Then I walked the 1.5 miles to the cabin. A printed notice had been taped to the door. Facility closed pending association review. Through the window, I saw more brochures on the table and a stack of blue wristbands beside a laptop stand. Someone had entered since the board meeting. I took photographs from the porch. A white SUV pulled into the clearing. Elaine stepped out with the association's maintenance supervisor, Tom Avery. Tom carried a plastic tool case. Elaine stopped when she saw me. "You should have checked in before entering the community," she said. "My road access is recorded. Your credential was suspended because of the dispute. You created the dispute by changing my lock." Tom looked at the door. "I was told we were checking the thermostat. You don't have my permission to enter," I told him. Elaine held up a tablet. "The association is responsible for protecting its facilities. Sarah had warned me not to block anyone physically. I stepped to the side and began recording video with my phone. I'm stating that I own this cabin and do not consent to entry." Elaine turned to Tom. "Go ahead." Tom entered a code. The lock beeped after each number, displayed a small green symbol, and opened. Tom hesitated. "Are these your things?" he asked Elaine. "The association materials are ours. The furniture is mine," I said. Tom set his case down. "I'm not getting in the middle of this." Elaine took the tablet from him and entered the cabin herself. She checked the thermostat, photographed the kitchen, and returned less than 3 minutes later. Before getting back into the SUV, she looked at my phone. This could have been handled without all of this. I asked for my key. That afternoon, the HOA sent me an invoice for $1,846. The charges included locksmith services, keypad installation, abandoned property cleanup, administrative review, and security monitoring. The letter said the account could be referred for collection if it was not paid within 30 days. Sarah read the invoice twice. "They're trying to make you pay for the lock that excluded you," she said. By then, the dispute was no longer limited to the cabin door. The HOA had disabled my road credential, continued entering after written notice, and created a debt record describing its actions as services performed for my benefit. Sarah filed a complaint in county court 4 days later. The complaint sought a declaration of ownership, restoration of access, an injunction against further entry, cancellation of the invoice, and reimbursement for damage caused by the lock replacement. She also filed a request for expedited preservation and limited production of the cabin access data and the administrative records related to my gate transponder. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for 3 weeks later and set a shorter conference to address preservation. That timeline mattered because my insurance carrier had scheduled a winter inspection of the cabin. The temperature was already dropping at night, and the inspector needed access to the plumbing and heating systems. Robert Dean offered to let the inspector enter, while an HOA representative remained present. Once again, the association offered supervised access instead of returning possession. My insurer granted a 14-day extension. Meanwhile, someone posted the old developer map on the neighborhood message board with a caption asking why a private owner was trying to take the community's caretaker cottage. The story was beginning to turn against me. The HOA had changed my locks, but residents were being told that I was taking something away from them. The old map was effective because it was easy to understand. My deed required attention. The map required only a glance. Sarah and I traced it to a promotional package submitted before the final subdivision plat was approved. The county planning department still had a scanned copy in an archived file. The package described the cabin as a future caretaker cottage and lake services point. Future. It showed what the developer wanted, not what the developer owned. The final recorded plat told a different story. It placed the cabin outside the association boundary and preserved my parcel's road access. In a separate county file, we found correspondence from 2005 between my father and the developer. The developer had offered to purchase the cabin. My father declined. The subdivision was redesigned around him. That correspondence explained the map, but it did not end the dispute. Robert Dean argued that an operational easement, unrecorded agreement, or turnover document might still exist. He did not say he had found one. He said the HOA needed more time to search. I began checking public records for any recent work connected to the cabin. At the county building office, I found a sign and occupancy application filed 6 weeks earlier by Blue Heron Ridge Association. The project description read, "Conversion of existing caretaker cottage to seasonal welcome and lake registration office." Elaine had signed as the association's authorized representative. The attached sketch showed a folding registration counter, visitor chairs, brochure racks, and an electronic access system. It matched the room I had photographed through the window. The county had not approved the application. A reviewer had asked the HOA to provide proof that it owned or had authority to operate inside the building. No proof appeared in the file. The application showed why the cabin mattered to the association. They were not merely securing what they believed was an abandoned building. They intended to use it as an operating location. Still, the permit file did not show how many people had entered, how often they had entered, or what happened after the board received my deed. That information was inside the lock system. The locksmith company initially refused to release anything voluntarily. Its office manager said Blue Heron Ridge was the customer and that the records belonged to the association's account. Sarah served a subpoena and a preservation notice. The gate contractor received a narrower request for records concerning my transponder and any administrative changes made to it. Robert Dean objected that the requests could expose private security information for hundreds of residents. Sarah narrowed them to one device, one cabin address, my transponder, and the management accounts that changed those specific records. At the court conference, the judge ordered the vendors to preserve and produce the limited data under a confidentiality agreement. The HOA was allowed to keep the cabin locked until the preliminary hearing, but the judge imposed a temporary restriction. No one was to enter unless there was an actual emergency, and any entry had to be reported to both sides. It was not the result I wanted. I was still locked out. But the HOA was no longer free to keep using the building while everyone waited. 2 days later, an old trail camera behind the cabin sent an image to my phone. I had mounted it years earlier to watch deer near the shed and had forgotten it was still active. The photograph showed 3 people walking toward the porch. One carried a stack of blue signs. The timestamp was 46 hours after the court entered its restriction. I sent the image to Sarah. She forwarded it to Robert Dean and asked whether the association had reported an emergency entry. Dean replied that he was investigating. Elaine later said a volunteer committee had gone to retrieve materials and had not been informed about the restriction. The trail camera showed the group approaching and leaving, but it did not capture the door itself. It could not prove that anyone entered. The keypad data arrived the next morning. The lock vendor produced an event log, a credential table, and an administrative audit. A records manager supplied a declaration explaining how the system worked. Each user could receive a separate numeric code or electronic credential. The event log recorded the credential used, the time, and whether the entry succeeded. It did not photograph the person entering. The administrative audit recorded which management account created, changed, or deleted each credential. The production covered the period beginning with the lock installation. There had been 57 successful entries. The records included separate credentials labeled for management, maintenance, board officers, weekend staff, and lake volunteers. One temporary credential was called Welcome Temp. The management account assigned to Elaine had created it on a Friday morning and set it to expire on Sunday evening. The credential opened the cabin 14 times that weekend. One of those entries matched the trail camera timestamp to the minute. Sarah read through the records before saying anything. "The log establishes that the credential was used," she said. "It does not necessarily establish which person typed it. But Elaine's account created the credential. It shows that the administrator account assigned to her created it. She may claim someone else had access to that account. That seems convenient." It may be. We still stay inside what the data proves. The log also showed that Elaine's assigned credential opened the cabin after the special board meeting, after my written objection, and after the lawsuit was filed. The gate records showed that my transponder had been disabled at 8:06, the morning after the board meeting. The administrative note read, "Suspend, property dispute." The change came from the same management account assigned to Elaine. There was no board resolution attached to the action, no safety report, and no violation notice. Sarah hired Michael Grant, an independent access control consultant, to review the vendor files. Grant did not determine ownership or legal authority. He examined the technical records. He confirmed that the event sequence was internally consistent with the vendor's system. He matched credential creation events with later entry events. He explained that the system distinguished between a user credential and the administrative account that issued it. He also confirmed that the exported data showed no obvious sign of alteration. On the day Elaine entered while I recorded from the porch, the two systems showed a clear sequence. My gate credential was already suspended. A vehicle credential assigned to management entered the community. Elaine's cabin credential opened the door. The door relocked 3 minutes later. The management vehicle exited the gate several minutes after that. The records did not tell us what Elaine thought. They did not prove why she entered. They showed that the association continued exercising access control after receiving my deed and written objection. Then the vendor produced the original work order. The service request had been submitted through Elaine's management account. It did not describe an emergency lock change. It read, "Replace owner-controlled deadbolt with association-managed smart lock. Configure separate staff and volunteer access for seasonal welcome operations." A box beneath the request stated, "Customer confirms authority to control access to premises." The box was checked. The deed showed that I owned the cabin. The permit file showed that the HOA wanted to use it as a registration office. The work order showed that management intentionally replaced an owner-controlled lock with an association-controlled system. The access logs showed that the system was then used repeatedly, including after the association received formal notice of my ownership claim. That sequence became the center of the case. Sarah sent Robert Dean a settlement proposal. The HOA would restore my gate credential, remove the smart lock, return exclusive possession of the cabin, withdraw the invoice, repair the damage, correct the permit application, and agree not to enter again without written permission, a documented emergency, or a court order. In exchange, I would postpone the preliminary hearing while the parties negotiated the remaining costs. The proposal did not demand resignations or admissions of criminal conduct. It gave the board a way to return the property without resolving every disputed issue immediately. Robert Dean asked for 2 days to meet with the board. During that meeting, Mark Hale questioned Elaine about the work order and access data. She maintained that she had relied on the development map and the association's turnover binder. She said staff and volunteer credentials had been created because management believed the building was part of the planned lake registration operation. Mark asked whether she had checked the recorded plat before replacing the lock. She said she had relied on the materials already maintained by the association. Robert Dean advised the board that no recorded document had been found giving the HOA possession of the cabin. He also explained the significance of the access logs. The old map might support an argument that someone had been mistaken at the beginning. The logs documented what happened after the mistake was challenged. They showed continued entries, new credentials, a temporary volunteer code, and the suspension of my gate access after the board had seen my deed. One board member wanted to accept the proposal. Another worried that returning the cabin before the hearing would look like an admission. Mark asked what practical problem the association faced if it returned the property while continuing to review the historical documents. The answer was simple. The marina office was under renovation, and the lake registration program was scheduled to open within 2 weeks. The cabin had been chosen as the temporary site. Returning it meant finding another location. The board voted to authorize restoration, but it did not happen immediately. Management said the association's materials had to be inventoried, volunteers notified, and the electronic lock reconfigured. Sarah notified the court that the HOA had agreed in principle but had not returned possession. Around the same time, the association's insurance carrier began asking questions after receiving notice of the claim. The carrier did not decide ownership. It requested records concerning the lock authorization, the work order, the permit application, and the entries that occurred after my written objection. The carrier also asked why Elaine's earlier description of limited inspection activity differed from the event data. The questions did not determine the case, but they made delay harder to defend. Robert Dean called Sarah late that week. "The board will restore possession Monday morning," he said. "Will the lock be removed?" "Yes." "Will the gate credential be restored?" "Yes." "Will the association's materials be gone?" "Yes." Monday morning arrived, and the lock did not open. The vendor had been unable to obtain the current administrator password from management. A technician had to be scheduled to reset and remove the device. The preliminary hearing was now 4 days away. Sarah declined to cancel it until the cabin was actually returned. The technician arrived the next afternoon. Robert Dean supervised while Mark and another board member observed. A neutral property inspector photographed the interior before anything was moved. The association had installed more equipment than I could see from outside. A folding counter stood in the main room. A small printer sat in the bedroom. Boxes of wristbands filled part of the closet. 2 metal cash boxes rested on a shelf. My furniture had been pushed against the walls. A framed photograph of my parents had been placed face down on a desk. The inspector documented screw holes, scratches near the counter, and damage around the deadbolt opening. The association removed its materials. The technician took off the smart lock. My locksmith installed a temporary mechanical deadbolt, and I received the keys. My gate transponder was reactivated that afternoon. I opened the cabin door for the first time in almost a month. The hearing still went forward because the HOA had not agreed to permanent restrictions and continued to reserve the right to assert any historical interest it might later discover. Sarah asked the judge for limited temporary relief. She did not ask the court to decide final damages or every possible easement claim. She asked for an order preserving my possession and stopping the HOA from recreating the access system while the case continued. She introduced the deed and recorded plat. She introduced the development application, describing the cabin as a proposed welcome office. She introduced the vendor work order, requesting an association-managed lock and volunteer credentials. She introduced the event log, credential table, and administrative audit. Michael Grant explained the limits of the data. Robert Dean asked whether the event log could identify the physical person who entered a code on every occasion. Grant said it could not. He asked whether some entries might have involved maintenance. Grant said the logs recorded access events, not the purpose of each visit. Sarah then asked what the system could establish. Grant explained that it could show which credential was used, when it was used, which administrator account created it, and when administrative changes were made. He walked through the temporary welcome credential, the entries after written notice, and the suspension of my gate transponder. The judge asked Robert Dean whether the HOA had found any recorded instrument giving it ownership or possession of the cabin. He said it had not. He argued that historical use questions remained unresolved and that the association should not be prevented from asserting a legitimate right if one was later discovered. The judge agreed that the final case was not ready for judgment. Then she addressed the immediate dispute. My deed and plat supported my ownership. The work order showed that the HOA had replaced an owner-controlled lock with an association-controlled system for staff and volunteer use. The access records showed repeated use after I challenged the association's authority and after the board reviewed my deed. Those later entries mattered because they undercut the claim that management had merely secured the building once while investigating an uncertain situation. The court entered a temporary injunction. The HOA and its agents were prohibited from entering, controlling, or altering the cabin without my written permission, a documented emergency, or further court order. The association could not suspend my gate access without a separate lawful basis and proper notice. It had to preserve the remaining electronic and management records. The court did not decide criminal intent. It did not award final damages. It did not rule on the identity of every person who used a credential. It restored control of the cabin to the recorded owner while the case continued. That was the reversal. The association had relied on the electronic lock to manage access without giving me a key. The same system produced a chronological record of how that control continued after the ownership dispute was known. Without the access data, the HOA could have kept describing the incident as a single precautionary lock change based on an old map. The logs showed something broader. They showed an operating system with staff codes, volunteer access, administrative changes, repeated entries, and the suspension of my road credential. The board voted that evening to abandon the welcome office plan and authorize permanent settlement terms. Over the next several weeks, the remaining issues were resolved. A surveyor confirmed that the cabin, porch, wellhead, and storage shed were within my parcel. The HOA's utility easement crossed only the rear corner and did not touch the building. The title company confirmed that no recorded transfer of the cabin to the association appeared in the chain of title. The developer's surviving files contain sketches and promotional material, but no completed conveyance. The management company conducted its own review. It concluded that Elaine had relied on non-recorded planning material, authorized the lock replacement, and continued treating the cabin as an association facility after receiving my written objection. The report did not accuse her of theft, forgery, or any crime. It found that she had exceeded her management authority and failed to obtain legal review before taking control of a disputed property. The company removed her from the Blue Heron Ridge account and later ended her employment. The final settlement became a stipulated court order. It confirmed my title to the parcel and stated that the HOA had no ownership, occupancy, management, or operational right inside the cabin. The association and its agents were permanently prohibited from entering, altering the locks, storing materials, issuing access credentials, or representing the building as an HOA facility without my written permission or a valid court order. The permit application was withdrawn. The old development map was retained as a historical planning document, but relabeled to show that it was not a record of ownership. The management company and insurer covered the documented repairs, inspection costs, locksmith charges, and an agreed portion of my legal fees. The lake registration program moved to a temporary trailer near the clubhouse until the marina office reopened. The board also changed one important procedure. Before management could secure, alter, enter, or represent control over a structure not clearly shown as a common element, it had to verify the current parcel record and obtain legal review when ownership was disputed. The cabin was removed from the association's access control account. The gate contractor added a note to my transponder record stating that my access came from a recorded easement and could not be suspended through ordinary HOA enforcement settings. Returning the key alone would not have been enough. The association's claim had traveled through the development map, the permit application, the vendor work order, the gate system, and the smart lock account. Each of those records had helped create the appearance that the HOA controlled the cabin. Each one had to be corrected. The first physical repair was the door. The electronic unit had required a larger opening than my original deadbolt, so the damaged section of the frame had to be replaced. I chose a simple mechanical lock, no remote administrator, no temporary volunteer code, no management account. Just a deadbolt and 3 keys. One stayed with me. One went into my bank's safe deposit box. The third went to Sarah in a sealed envelope for emergencies. I moved the furniture back. The folding counter, brochures, signs, wristbands, printer, and cash boxes were gone. I rehung the photograph of my parents. A few weeks later, Mark Hale came to the cabin with a copy of the corrected association map. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, instead of walking straight to the door. The new map showed my parcel as a white shape inside the larger blue subdivision boundary. Beside it was a label. Private parcel, not HOA property. The old version had been copied for years, Mark said. Most of us assumed somebody had checked it. My name was in the county records. I know. He looked toward the lake. We should have stopped when you brought the deed to the meeting. I did not disagree. The original mistake was easy to understand. Someone saw an old planning map, found a building labeled Caretaker Cottage, and assumed it belonged to the association. What happened after that was different. The board had been shown the deed. Management had received a written objection. The association had been offered a way to return the property while reviewing the history. But the cabin was useful. It solved a problem. The registration program needed a location, and returning the building meant changing the plan. That practical dependence kept the dispute alive longer than the old map ever could have. The access logs made that visible. They did not prove every motive. They did not identify every person who crossed the doorway. They did not decide ownership by themselves. The deed established ownership. The logs established what the association did with its control after that ownership was challenged. That was enough to change the case. By spring, the marina office reopened, and the temporary registration trailer disappeared. Residents still launched their boats. The roads still needed maintenance. The clubhouse still held meetings. Most people stopped talking about the cabin. A few apologized. Others avoided the subject. I stopped checking the neighborhood message board. I had never needed every resident to agree with me. I needed the HOA to stop treating my property as an amenity. One Saturday morning, I drove through the subdivision entrance. My restored transponder triggered the gate, and the arm lifted. At the cabin, I carried a bag of groceries onto the porch and looked at the repaired section of the doorframe where the keypad had been. Then I took out my key. It slid into the lock. I turned it once. The deadbolt moved, and the door opened. No management account recorded my arrival. No volunteer credential appeared in a system. No board member had to approve my entry. I picked up the groceries and stepped inside my cabin. Then I closed the door behind me.